I often think that we think creating a young adult ministry or trying to look and feel younger on a Sunday morning is going to solve the problem. And I think it's just more of a band aid into deeper issues.
Welcome to the Enduring Church Podcast, hosted by Nathan Castleberry and Michael Davis, helping pastors grow their churches while equipping the body to love their neighbors. Yeah, their literal neighbors. Nathan, we are back. How's it going, brother?
It's great, and it's good to be here talking about something that I don't know that I'm doing a very good job with today.
Well, considering the median age of my church is about 83, I think that we all could probably do a little bit of a better job. So, yeah. So listen, let's get to it. I do want to talk about the barbecue that you're doing right now, but for now, let's talk about why a lot of churches, especially in this modern age, is they're just having a difficult time attracting younger people, younger families. So let's just get to that first question. What would you say are the biggest reasons young adults are leaving the church, and what do you think can be done about it?
You know, this is as long as I've been in ministry, and I've been in traveling as a worship leader when I was 15, all these different denominations and all these different churches, and to this day, from the early 2000s to 2025, I don't know that anybody has ever had a definitive answer for this question. And when one church pops off with young adults, everyone's like, well, let's do what they did, and copy and paste doesn't always really work so well. So I wish I had some sort of deep insight. Some of my thoughts are our high school ministry models in a lot of ways keep kids isolated from the bigger church. And so there are some pretty compelling studies out there that show when teenagers, when high schoolers have a relationship with somebody inside their church family that is not their parent or guardian, it's something crazy. Like they're 75% more likely to not drift from their faith or even drift from church engagement when they move out on their own and go to college. So I would be asking a lot of questions that are really upstream of young adult ministry. Like, what are we doing in youth ministry that is causing people to feel zero interest or zero connectivity to their bigger church circles? And I'm not saying that as a critique on youth ministry. It might be more of a critique or the need to look under the hood and say, to emphasize the importance of more adults volunteering in youth ministry.
Yeah, I think that there's a plurality of issues that are dealing with the modern church when it comes to young people. I don't even know if I would say that there is a drifting away of young folks who are in church away. I just think that there might be a drifting away of where some people even just see it as a necessity. It used to be that that being a part of a church had social equity, right? There was this is how you. I mean, I think there's still an element of this, right? Where the way that you would meet your potential spouse, the way that you got your job, the way that you had. I mean, if you were not a part of your town's church, there was actually some negative implications of it. I think a lot of that is going away. I think also there is a this belief that that the institutional church, whatever that means, is a negative as compared to a positive. And I'm not even saying that maybe some of those critiques are wrong. I think there's also when the wider culture starts seeing, the local church as a negative, that it's a bigoted institution rather than one that is loving and that cares for folks. There's so many different issues with it. But I mean, we can talk about those issues. I think that there's also the issues of what churches are doing to even attract younger believers. Where there's, to your point, this formulaic idea that if I do X and Y, I will have young families at my church. If I do, Z and A, then we're going to make them want to leave. And I think that that rather than saying, hey, I want my church to look like my community, and I know we're going to be talking about that in future episodes, I think that we're trying to say, like, almost turn this into a math equation, when rather than dealing with individual believers as, image bearers of God, or just even, just attracting even non-believers into our local church to be able to give us the ability to be able to speak about Jesus to them. But man, that, it's funny. I'm the one that came up with this episode idea, and I'm like, this could be something that we talk about for the next 20 episodes, because there's just so many different things that go into that.
Well, again, to me, I do think targeting young adults is dealing more with symptoms of young adult disengagement than root cause. Not saying we shouldn't target young adults. Like, we have a young adult Bible study, and it's good, and we're seeing young adults start coming to our church, and we're not really targeting them. So we're trying to lean in and figure out what drew them here. I met with a young family recently. They've got a 2-year-old son, and one of the things they talked about, that I was like, so what works for you at our church? And what he talked about was feeling like that our kids are safe and secure.
Yeah.
More so than the content, the curriculum, the sermons. He's like, dude, y'all take good care of the kids. And so, like, in some ways, like, don't overthink it. Like, if you want to reach young families, it may not be with cool lights and trendy songs. Like, young families are probably more concerned about safety and hygiene and security of, like, I'm leaving my kid in the care of strangers.
No,
So
absolutely.
I think there's a conversation about maybe not being so tunnel vision focused on young adults. Not saying, like, we now put our marketing hat on. You're a marketer. Know your audiences and deploy strategies and tactics. This is not saying that strategy and tactics and doing things unique to young adults doesn't have its place. It certainly
Yeah.
does. But I often think that we think creating a young adult ministry or trying to look and feel younger on a Sunday morning is going to solve the problem. And I think it's just more of a Band-Aid into deeper issues.
Thank you for checking out the Enduring Church podcast on YouTube. If you could do us a favor, hit the subscribe button and the bell icon to make sure that you're aware whenever a new episode drops. Also, if you got some time, give us a thumbs up and also leave a comment. Really helps us with the algorithm. Well, now back to the show. Yeah, I mean, I think if I had to put my finger, and we're not talking about like young people drifting away from the church. That's a whole other animal. Let's just talk about why certain churches are having a difficult time attracting young folks into their, to attend their church or to become a member of their church. I think, especially when you're, again, this is marketing hat on, especially when we're dealing with younger Gen X, millennials, and definitely Gen Alphas. There's one thing that is universal among all of them, and that is this desire for authenticity. And I think that you can do all those things. Like, we're trying to create an environment that is welcoming to families, but if it's not done in an authentic way, they can see it just like anyone can see it, right? If like it's like that meme with Buscemi where he goes, "Hello, fellow young people." It's
Yes,
like
yes.
they can see that this is something that's done in a way that's not authentic. But the thing that's kind of encouraging, and I'm seeing this a lot, especially with some very successful church plants, is almost like going old school feels more authentic to young folks. So I attended a church that literally went, we're doing communion every single week. We are focused on community. We're going to be preaching out through books of the Bible. We're going to be singing hymns with like an acoustic guitar and a cajon, because hipsters, right? And it was like doing all the things that people say you shouldn't do, right? None of the lights, none of the rock shows or whatever. And our problem wasn't that we were having a difficult time attracting young folks. We were actually having a hard time attracting older folks. So we were like, we need more mature believers to help, because, when you're dealing with an entire church of baristas and artists, you're going to have issues with people volunteering, with giving and stuff like that. So it's interesting that oftentimes that old school feel, just like a lot of them really like the the woodworking and all the other stuff. Like there's a desire for that authentic old school kind of experience, like the hymns, that maybe just that the young people are even more attracted to.
Just speaking in terms of, I think we're speaking more about marketing here for a minute. Maybe not. Marketing may not be the right word. Maybe just doing things that attract young adults, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
I think oftentimes pastors think they need to look and feel younger, and it's like I just want to say this. I'm about to be 39. Like I know I'm not old.
Yeah, thank you.
And I feel really great whenever senior adults are like, "Oh, you're still so young." I'm like, "Okay, good. I want to believe that I'm young." But then when I get around like actual young adults, I'm like, "Well, I don't really feel so young right now."
Yeah.
So I you said authenticity. When I see pastors a lot of times like trying really hard to look like a Gen Z.
Yeah.
When you're not, like, I don't know that's going to help you reach more Gen Z just because because you're down with like the latest fashion trends. Can I just throw that out there? Like a way to make young adults feel seen is not by trying to look like them. Like just be you. Like if there's anything I know about Gen Z is like they're not like if you're just like a dad, they're cool with you just being like a dad. Like wear the New Balance, like wear the cargo, wear the car. Have your grill apron with a pun and some tongs, they are much more drawn to you being you than you trying to pretend like you're one of them. So I used to like when my chin started going gray, I was like, oh man, like I got to keep this thing trim. So I'll still like, no, you know what? Like I'm me. I'm who God called me to be. And man, like cool is not a fad, a trend, a look. Cool is you being the version of you that God has wired you to be.
Absolutely. And it's actually, I think it's the same model for attracting non-believers to your church. If you're doing something, this is what I always say, let's just talk about search marketing, which maybe some people talk about, it's in SEO with churches. It's always just this weird topic. I always say the same thing when I talk to clients. It's like, if you are doing something that is intentional in order to game the system, Google is going to smash you. It's just the way it is. And I think it's the reason why they do that is because anything that's done in an inauthentic way is going to make the person who's searching for an answer to their search query upset. And they're not going to like the result because it's done in an inauthentic way. So let's say you're using unnatural language. Let's say you're using like local church or church near me repeatedly in your in the copy or the text within your homepage. It's called keyword stuffing, and Google's going to see that and they're going to be like, no, this is silly. This is something that worked back in like the 90s and the early 2000s. No one does that anymore, but they're obviously trying to game the system. I think it's the same way. If you're going like, like, hey, no cap, what's going on, fam? Say less. Like, and you're like 45, like that. Not only is that going to be off-putting, they're going to say, okay, if he's inauthentic in this way, how is he inauthentic in other ways? Maybe what he's saying is not authentic. So I think that be true to yourself, and then be true to the gospel, be true to the community that you're in. And then I think, and this is the point that and you hit this, and I want to repeat this. Young people don't care how old you are. Young people want to be seen, and they want to experience the real you. They want to experience the real church. They don't want something that is done in a way that is a formulaic experience. They deal with that every single day. They're dealing with like the ads that they see, the content they're consuming is constantly trying to get them to do something. And they can spot that a million miles away. It's not going to be effective. But like, yeah, we just need to have more, we need to have more songs from Bethel. We need to have more, we need to have this type of sermon. We need to have this type of welcome experience. Like they just don't want that. They just want to experience community, and but genuine community. And I think that's what I think a lot of churches are missing.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, genuine community, with people who are comfortable in their own skin is
Yep.
pretty irresistible.
No, 100%. And I think, but let's just take a step back away from just young people. I think everyone wants that. They
Right.
don't, if you're, it's funny. One of the things that I experienced in certain community groups, right, is you can always tell that couple who is completely full of it when they're talking to you and they're saying, "Oh man, everything is just so wonderful. Like everything is great. Like our marriage has been never been better. Like everything is so great." And like you know that their kids are having issues, that their marriage is having issues, but they're putting on a front that's just not real. Anyone can spot that a mile away. And it's not helpful because the people who are dealing with stuff then don't feel comfortable with being true or speaking with their struggles and their issues. People don't need you. And again, I'm going to talk to the pastor here on this one. They don't need you to be hip. They don't need you to be like, to try the different tactics. They need you to be, vulnerable. They need you to be real, and they need you to be a human being. And whether they're 18 or whether they're 80, that's just what they need from you.
I think I've quoted this before, but when I used to work at Central Christian in Las Vegas, and Judd Wilhite, the pastor, he would always challenge. It was our staff, and also when we would go to conferences, he would say, Do you love the church you have, or the church that you wish you had?"
Yep.
And so I think, again, that doesn't mean if you're not reaching young adults, that doesn't mean that you just ignore young adults.
Right.
But I think it does mean it's like, okay, well, who is God setting our way now? And are there ways that we can equip and mobilize them to be a blessing to the younger adult community? Is there something that is missing here? Are there things that we are maybe doing that are like causing disinterest or disengagement? You can do all those things. You can look under the hood. You can evaluate. You can make tweaks. But like, love the church you've got. Just because you're not reaching young adults doesn't mean you're failing. Like almost no church is reaching young adults. And historical trends would show us majority of Christians kind of party their way through their 20s. They have kids and think, oh, I got to raise my kids in church. And they're back in church by their 30s. Now,
Yep.
I'm not saying that's okay. I'm not saying that's how it should be. I'm just saying that's how it is. So I think, yes, should we be talking about some tools? Should we be talking about some best practices? Should we be mindful of some success stories? Yes, but when we copy and paste, you might be lacking nuance and contextualization that young adults these days have a high radar for, like something that is inauthentic. So if they sense that you're trying to be young, if they sense that you're trying to be cool, if they sense it's almost patronizing to them. So don't go too far. Don't reinvent the wheel to reach a demographic that historically doesn't even want to be in church anyway.
Yeah.
Do what you need to do to be the good fisher of men, but don't do it in a way that you sell out your own what uniqueness about what makes you you.
Yeah, and hear me out. I'm not saying to not make it like helpful for young families. So here's a good example. If your church has no children's ministry for toddlers, and a young family is not used to having a 2 or 3-year-old with them in the church service, that could be a problem for them, right? So I'm not saying that you should completely just ignore making your church something that's going to be helpful for them, because again, we're gone to the days, or there are very few churches where people are expecting babies to be crying and toddlers to be running around during a sermon, which, by the way, I think is pretty rad. But I still put my young kids in children's ministry. But that being said, a lot of folks are going to expect that and need that in order to be able to feel comfortable, especially if they're visiting. They don't want to be visitors and then all of a sudden their kids start screaming the entire time. So hear me out, but do it in a way, because we're doing this because we want to love the community and we want to love the young families that are coming here, not because this is something we have to do in order to be the church for them.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, if there's something you are doing that creates barriers for young adults, stop doing it. Stop doing it. But the solution to your problem of reaching young adults may not be to spin up a young adult ministry. I'm not saying it will help. I'm not saying it will hurt. But I think we generally go there. We need to do something to engage young adults. It's like, well, in the things that are already happening where you've already got volunteers deployed and systems engaged, start with kind of an audit there and say, hey, is there anything that may be a barrier of entry or something that is disorienting to a young adult that is trying to find their way into a community of faith? Start there and just see, like, okay, are we at least young adult friendly? We may not have,
Yeah.
and a lot of times we start these ministries reactionary, and we don't wait for the right people. We just find the young people and it's like, hey, put on a Bible study or this, that, and the other. So go slow. Start with, what are some levers you can pull right now that may just, create a little more welcoming atmosphere to the young families that are coming your way.
I'm a marketer, right? So I'm going to go back to marketing. I always say this, and it's like, listen to your market, listen to your market, listen to your market. If you have young people in your church, listen to them. They're going to have good things to say. But I think you are completely and totally right when you say, like, take away the barriers, but don't take away barriers that aren't actually there. Right? listen to the people who God has placed in your life, the young folks or the young families, and say, you know what are we doing well and what aren't we doing well? This is one of those things where candor is really helpful, where they can feel comfortable in saying, you know what, like, one of the things that we would like to see, or maybe they might even say, I would love to volunteer to do this. Like, we would love to see more X. And then when
Yeah.
you say, okay, this is really helpful. And the truth is that we like to think of ourselves as very unique individuals. And we're all unique individuals made in the image of God. But there's a lot of things that if you grow up in a certain place and you're a certain age and you're around certain people, there's a lot of similarities. And oftentimes we don't actually ask the people that we're trying to target what they actually want. We're making assumptions about the things that they want, or we're making assumptions about the things that they don't want, rather than going, hey, Bill, you're a 19-year-old college student. What do you think we could be doing better? But we don't do that. We just make assumptions. And then, to your point from the beginning of the show, you say, okay, this person is doing it really well. Like, let's say, here's a good example. We do communion every week. Like, oh, young people want communion every week. Well, let's start doing that rather than actually asking them, because, like I said before, every church is unique, and every community is unique, and they're just going to want different things. Listen, don't assume.
So it's funny. Like, that's actually what I was going to say. That we are working on literally this week. This podcast will obviously air at a later time, so we'll be able to circle back, and I can give you an update on how well this is working. But our church makeup is mostly like older millennials like me with elementary age kids, and then boomers who would be like the grandparent age. We don't
Right.
have a ton of Gen Z, don't have a ton of Gen X with adolescent kids. So this past year, I've just been mindful of the Gen X, mindful of the Gen Z, trying to do some things to engage those families. And so one of the things that's been seeming to be helpful is when I notice people that fit that demographic, I'm scheduling time with them pastorally just to ask questions. Hey, what brought you here? What are we doing that's helpful? What are we doing that what could we be doing better? And just getting feedback. And I think that's, I'm not inviting every young adult into a leadership role. I'm not giving every young adult a microphone. I'm not making every young adult a small group leader. I'm just trying to, like, show them that, hey, me as the leader of this ministry, of this church, I value your insight. And it's like when I reach out to them for coffee or reach out to them for lunch, it's funny. They are like so surprised that a pastor is just wanting to not ask them to serve, not ask them to do something. It's purely just, hey, what's working, what's not working. And so I think if you're trying to figure out how to, what is some low-hanging fruit that will help young adults feel seen, valued, engaged? What if you actually saw them, express that you value them, and engage them personally? Chances are, I mean, just statistically, you don't have a ton of young adults in your church right now. There are
Right.
enough for me to meet with one-on-one and not be overwhelmed over a few weeks. So engage them. Like, you don't have to start a ministry in order for people to feel seen and engaged. You can actually just engage with them.
Yeah. And also understand that this is also not just in regards to hearing and understanding them, but understand that, like, their discipleship requirements are going to be a little bit different. You know, people who have young families or people in college, again, this doesn't necessarily mean you have to create a program, but just understand that the way you speak about certain things, as long as it's done in an authentic way, is going to resonate. If you're going to be giving nothing but sermons on, you know, how to finish well, or doing all the, you know, the standard, you know, just understand that their life experience is going to be a little bit different. So there's going to be potentially the things that you need to speak about might be a little bit different. But at the end of the day, if you're going to address them like real human beings rather than a demographic, it's going to be fine. And I think that if your heart is for loving your community well, and if your heart for your church is to love your community well, and if you do it in an authentic way without the where it's not perceived as wanting something from them, I think that you're going to see young people coming in. As long as you have systems and processes in order to serve them and to have your church serve your community well, I think you're going to do it. You're going to be just fine.
Yeah. Yep. Well, and again, like one of the things you talking about is, w- are you when you're building your teaching calendar or even your social media calendar, I think that's another way to engage them and let them feel seen, valued, um, without going through all of the extra sideways energy oftentimes that it takes to create a young adult ministry. It's like,
Yeah.
is your church does your church posture, demeanor, uh, communication content even speak to some of the issues that young adults might be having question marks or pain points with? You know?
Yeah, and I will say one thing that is really really off-putting to young folks is the culture war stuff. Now, I will say that there's been a pretty to use the Gen Alpha slang. There's been a pretty substantial vibe shift, I think, since the election last year. But that being said, I think that if you get swallowed into it, and where you're almost like you're focused on like political issues, which by the way, the boomers love. Let's just
Yeah.
be honest, they
Yep.
love that stuff. Young folks don't like it because it comes off as inauthentic also.
Well, and they're also bombarded with it everywhere else. You know,
That's
it's like,
exactly right.
not that we shouldn't have a prophetic voice in the midst of culture and help Christ followers have a biblical worldview. Um, I think there is something to be said that that time where you're together on Sunday mornings, some people are like looking for relief from the
Yep.
inundation of all the polarizing things. So anyway, what I see, what this should be like our time to shine as churches as it relates to young adults, because young adults these days are kind of like the hippies were in some ways. Like, they're all about good vibes and manifestations and
Yep.
crystals, and while there is some like psychic borderline demonic stuff with all that, like, we spent all this time in the late 90s to early 2000s trying to act like we're not spiritual, that we are, you know, super practical, and your marriage will be better, your parenting will be better, and all those things should be true if we are like following Jesus fully. Like, it will impact our marriages and all these things. I do feel like the, you know, attractional model that we've had to reach the churches for the unchurched have been a little bit too moralistic, too self-helpy, and I don't know that like Gen Z and Gen Alpha is looking for 3 steps to a better marriage. Like, I think they are actually looking for supernatural things. They're just finding it in horoscopes and like all that stuff is having like a second golden age. So for us to like create environments where they can see the Spirit of God move, where they can see people passionately, unashamed, like have biblical postures of praise, like get weird, like like
Yeah.
look more like the Acts chapter 2 church, like create moments for the anointing of oil and the laying of hands on and pleading with God for a miracle. Like, I think this next generation is hungry for something beyond the utility of our faith. They're looking for like the substance, the Holy Spirit. Like, what, like this should be our moment.
Yeah. And you know, it's funny because you're right. The Acts model is what they're looking for.
Right.
Because it's genuine community, it's genuine experience, it's genuine life change.
And
They're not.
there's a supernatural element to it, you know,
That's exactly
that's
right.
like, why are we so scared of that?
But I mean, listen, let's be honest. This idea of the almost lifeboat model. Like the culture is so depraved that we are almost like the Benedict option type thing. Like we must separate ourselves from the world. But the young people have like they have unbelieving friends. They have friends who are in living in relationships where they're not married or in gay relationship. If we love our community like God has told us to, which is right, like love God with everything we have and love our neighbor like ourselves, not love the believer neighbor next to like we love ourselves, but our actual neighbors, like where we, again, I hate this term because people have overused it during the attractional model, like be known for what we're for more than what we're against. But there's a kernel of truth to that.
More
If
than a kernel. I mean, I think there's some serious gravity to that.
Absolutely. Now we cannot like turn away and like say that sin is okay. Like we have to be truthful in that, but you don't love someone by cutting them off or saying that they are too far gone to be with Jesus. And again, even believing young folks are turned off by that because I think to your point, I think that we could be potentially on the precipice of like massive revival. We saw elements of this, I think, like a year and a half ago or a couple years ago, with all those revivals. Young kids are searching for this. If you look at even like people who are searching for churches every week, we've talked about that statistic. Like there are 3 million people in the United States every year that are searching for some variation of church near me. There are people looking for churches. There are people looking for answers. And if we can reflect the love of God, if we can reflect the love of just love of neighbor, like that's what young people are looking for. They're not looking for freaking, fog machines and rock shows. They can get that from, YouTube, or they can get that from going to a show.
Yeah, again, so for me, it's like play to your strengths. If
Yep.
you are, and I've said this before, if you are gifted with some great production, like use that, but just know that that may or may not be the thing the young adults in your neighborhood are looking for. If you know kind of the mental health landscape and
Hmm.
and some of these things, like those are a lot of the felt needs that young adults are interested in these days. So I do a lot of counseling with a firm called Spring Life, and one of the therapists there talks about kind of the unintended fallout of the normal like mainstreaming of mental health. Like, we grew
Yeah.
up, counselors only for crazy people. And so now we've destigmatized it, but we've gone so far
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
she calls it pop psychology.
Yeah.
So all these accounts are going super viral with life coaching, mental health things, and most of them aren't really like mental health experts, but there's a reason those things are going off. And so I think addressing from the pulpit how our faith can accent and strengthen our mental health and those things, and show how an integrated approach matters, and encouraging people not to self-diagnose because they listen to a podcast and they think they are now trauma informed.
Yeah.
Like encourage, like speaking to some of those things. Like you can make a whole entire sermon series inspired by the truths found in a book, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. And I think
Yeah.
that would deeply resonate with a younger audience because they're asking a lot of those questions right now.
And the thing that's also cool is that there's, I think the last 8 years we've kind of gone through it's funny. I said don't go culture war, but I'm going to a little bit. That there's been kind of this weird insanity about the identity and self, right? That we create. But the thing that's interesting is I think young people are rebelling against it. The thing that's interesting is that counterculture is now the trad movement, right? Counterculture is now, being a Christian. And I think that a lot of churches are losing a substantial opportunity to attract young folks, especially like legitimately young folks, like non-married college students, because they've been sold a bill, they've been given a bill of sale for something that is where my identity is from myself, my worth is from myself. What is good comes from myself. And I think a lot of folks are smart enough to realize that those answers are hollow. And I think that there's a longing, and I think that the data is truth, it reflects this. And I think that even just the experience of just actually just interacting with those folks is starting to show that these young people are not idiots. And I think this is where I think a lot of folks like, again, we were upset about this when we were kids, and that the boomers were all thought we were all burnouts and idiots. And I am Gen X, barely, but I am a Gen X. And now we're doing the same thing to young folks. Like, we've always looked for authenticity, and we're always looking for people who, again, in a spirit and dwell believer, whether they're 18 or that they're 80, can see whether or not you love well. And yes, politics is about othering folks. The church is about loving those who God has placed, and that it doesn't matter that, and let the Spirit do the work. Love well and love your neighbor well, and love God with everything. And I think that we've, a lot of times, because we've had that isolationist mindset, for a lot of maybe some of the older pastors who kind of came to, grew up in the 80s and the 90s, where it really was an us versus them. Young people don't make that distinction anymore, and I think that's awesome. I think that's great.
Yeah, I have seen a lot of the young adults that have assimilated into some of our discipleship ministries, um, acknowledge that they actually like being in a group where there are people their grandparents' age, people their
Yeah.
parents' age, people their age. So a multi generational approach is I think there's a lot of power in that. There's some wisdom that can be shared, and I do agree. This generation of young adults seems to be more open to that than maybe previous generations were of young adults. Yeah, I will say though the big tension that I have is this though. Uh, while I see the value, and I've heard from them the value of that as well, the moving. I don't know if other pastors on that are listening since this, but getting people to engage in a small group has been more challenging than getting people to engage with giving. And I'm hearing
Yeah,
that
I
the
won't lie to you. That's the case us too. Yeah.
Yep. I think there's a little bit of a tension of just especially young families these days, like just lots of responsibilities, lots of pressure to get your kids on all these teams, and so I think there is a little bit of a unique stress that young families feel now that's not totally dissimilar from what other generations have felt as with parenting, but there does seem to be um, a little bit of a busier, fast paced, got to show up to all the things. And so we can sometimes be a little bit tone deaf by saying what you need to get in a small group, you need all these things. So one of the things we're experimenting with is more like short term commitments, more of
Yeah.
like a short term Bible study on Wednesday nights with childcare than, a 2 year commitment to a small group. So again, just that's one of the strategies and tactics that we're experimenting with is like I prefer best case scenario in my mind pastorally is intergenerational, but knowing that there are some demographic specific things, we're trying to experiment with a young adult Bible study that is not just going to go on forever and ever. Like, what would a young family Bible study look like, where we go through, a parenting devotion together, or a communication devotion, or a mental health devotion? 4 to 6 weeks seems to be a little bit of a easier next step than I'm just going to join this small group until we can't do it anymore.
Yeah. I want to kind of go back to what you were saying in regards to intergenerational. I've got, I'm pretty active in my church. I'm here every day pretty much. And even as a lay leader. But one of the things I've noticed is that, like, even people who are under the age of 18, like teenagers and older folks, like, there's none of the us versus them here. It's weird, because I remember being really like, oh, I don't want to talk to anyone over the age of like 22. They're all weird and old. I think that so not only should your church be authentic, I think any type of like mentor type of relationship, like, that should be fostered. These young people want the wisdom that your older folks have. And they're not off put by it, as long as that relationship is authentic. And I think that there is this desire. Now, hear me out. It is nice when you're not the only young person in a community group or in a Bible study. So there's got to be this intentionality of having a variety of different age ranges and demographics. But I think that as long as it's done in a way that's authentic, and that where people don't feel like they're being put together because of, let's say, a certain reasons, I think they're going to be fine with it. But I think that it should be a culture issue within your church, not necessarily just a what is the leadership within the church doing in order to make it more attractive. Because that's where discipleship comes in, right? We have to learn to love everyone well, not just the people who we feel comfortable around. And that's the responsibility of discipleship, not just in regards to how we do church.
Well, another way that you can make some of these ministries or Bible studies or whatever you have bandwidth to launch to better serve young adults, two things, because you're right, you don't want them to be the only ones there. They want to. That's a big thing that young adults and teenagers are asking, like, well, who's going to be there? So
Yeah.
doing the ground game, like getting that core group established just over coffees and lunches, and just saying, hey, I want you to be here at this thing. So knowing that you can kind of preload with a bought-in core group nucleus, that's one step, and that's not going to take too much time to relationally invest in them enough to where you're not cashing in too much of your relational equity to ask them to come to a young adult Bible study or something. But then go around and ask some boomers, like, hey, we're going to start this young adults
Yeah.
Bible study. It's going to go about 6 weeks. Hey, could you bring food on week 2? And just love on these people, like, I'm not expecting you to come and have words of wisdom. Just love them. Like, can we just be a church that loves well? And some of that intergenerational stuff might just manifest just because you've created space for it.
Yeah, and and if they make fun of you saying you were from the 19th century, then or the 1900s, just understand that's a part of it. But I think that as long as the people who are invited there don't see it as I'm babysitting, I think this is where. But I'll tell you, if you come at younger folks, with a posture of like, I have something to learn from you too, they're gonna be receptive.
That's great.
It's neat. Like I have a couple relationships. There's one guy in particular who's a friend, the son of a friend of mine, and people probably know this. I'm really into like shooting sports and I like guns and whatever. Probably gonna lose some folks on this one, but he's like super into this. He wants to go in the military. I was in the Army, so he's obviously I've got life experiences that he's interested in learning about. And we will go shooting, and we'll go and we'll have lunch, or we'll talk at church. But there's never this weird, like, we joke around it because he's a believer. We have similar interests. I'm friends with his dad, but like this weird kind of like friendship that isn't necessarily like that could be seen as inauthentic, but that is organic, and that but intentional. And I think that if older folks, like, again, even if you're a boomer or a Gen X person, if you're like really desiring to have like genuine fellowship with people who aren't exactly your age or exactly in your same life stage, you actually that comes off as authentic, and that comes off as community. But the thing is, we're more comfortable with people who look like us, who talk like us, who are in the same life stage. But I think that we're all called as believers, and especially within the local church context, to kind of mortify that.
Yeah, yeah, and I think there's, for me, I guess the language that I would use to kind of my last thoughts on this is, I think it's a both and approach. I think it's
I agree.
appropriate to do some demographic specific strategies and tactics to let that area, that age group. And I think this goes across the board, seniors,
I agree.
kids, all these things. But I think what we do with that and how we invite them into deeper levels of discipleship, whatever your assimilation process is, the more that can become intergenerational. I mean, we have studies, like I shared earlier, like it's when high school students have connectivity to an adult at their church that is not mom or dad, it's like they're like 75% more likely to stay connected. So we just know there's such value in that intergenerational relationship with people who are not flesh and blood, people who are not obligated to love you.
Yep. I mean, that's it. I think it really does. Again, I keep using this word, but it all comes back to authenticity, right? Make
Right.
sure that you've got like things in there that will not be a barrier. Again, if you have young families, even if you have a couple people who are volunteering in youth and that they have some place to drop their toddlers off, just make it so that it's not a burden for them, and then just be authentic. And I think you're going to have no problem attracting young families and young people. I think that's just the case.
So you're saying I don't need to know what like cap and bet and sigma and skib. I don't know the language of young people these days. So should I
Yeah.
learn that, or should I just like be okay with the fact that I'm blissfully ignorant of some of those things?
I will tell you, there is a reason to do it. And it's a very, very important reason, because it embarrasses the poop out of him. And that itself is really funny.
I have
And
tried to do that with my own kids, and I'm like, was that sigma? I don't know. And they're
I
like,
actually don't know
"Dad,
what
stop."
stop. Actually, I had Gavin, my oldest. He actually walked out of a restaurant once because he was so upset that I was like, "Come on, say less, fam," and he just got up and left.
Well, I'm, to the young listeners, sorry you had to endure our
It's literally every episode,
attempt at speaking your language.
Well, listen, thank you so much for going over this. Here's the thing: like we're saying these things, but no one's actually doing this well. So just understand, Pastor, that it's okay. Even though that Nathan and I have figured this all out, we're struggling through all this just like you are. Neither of our churches are exactly the way that our community looks like.
Yeah, and if you follow us on social media, and some of the clips that'll probably be posted from this, would love to hear some comments about
Yeah.
some things that have been helpful for your church in reaching young adults. We'd love to learn from you.
Yeah, and by the way, I just want to just give a shout out to all the listeners. We're recording this on February 28th, and we're literally about to hit 2,500 listeners on the audio
Yes.
version of our podcast.
Thank you.
I mean, we've got people from all over the world, and I just want to tell you how humbled we are that this little show that we started is starting to have the listeners that we have. But just understand, we are super grateful for all of you. If you want to share it with your pastor friends, or even just your lay leaders, or just people who want to see like behind the scenes, please, that would be super helpful. But just understand how grateful we are that you guys are listening. This makes a huge difference for us.
Yes. Like, share, comment. If it's added value to you, we would love to know all the different ways that you are learning things. But yes, thank you. It's really cool to see this little ecosystem forming.
Absolutely. Well, listen, Nathan, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you all for listening, and we'll catch you guys in a couple weeks.
Talk soon.
This has been the Enduring Church Podcast with Nathan Castleberry and Michael Davis. We'll see you next time.